Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. As a reminder, please note that this audit committee meeting is being recorded for the convenience of those unable to attend this video conference. Aday, could you please call roll?
Sure. John Maderick,
Present.
Nicholas Soto,
Present.
Lindsay Oates.
Russell Buckley present for Lindsay Oates as
Thank
her
you.
alternate.
Thank you, Russell. Tom Shepard,
Present.
Karina Tavares, Anthony Lopez.
Present.
Thank you. Gregory Faulkner, Alan Ong,
Present.
Thank you, Aday. It sounds like we have a quorum. The first order of business is agenda item number 2, noting the minutes of the audit committee of BERS held on April 13th, 2022. The minutes have been previously provided to the committee via the SharePoint site and via email. May I have a motion to consider the minutes from the April 13th committee meeting?
So moved.
Thank you, Tony. May I have a second?
Second, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Any comments or discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, please raise your hand and vote verbally aye with your name if you vote to approve the minutes. Aye, Russ.
Aye, Anthony. Aye, Tom.
Aye, Alan.
John.
The minutes are approved. Next item on the agenda is item number 3, the executive director's update. Sandy, would you like to share any remarks with us?
I will be uncharacteristically brief. Only one piece of news, the actuarial audit, which cycles through the systems every 5 years, I believe. I may have gotten that wrong, but I believe every 5 years, launches in the next month or so. Milliman was selected as the external auditor. And, this is just the beginning of the audit season as the fiscal year comes to an end. So there'll be plenty to do for Aday and our fiscal staff. That's about it for me.
You said the actuarial firm doing the audit was Middleman?
Milliman, yes, Milliman. They were
Millerman?
selected out of a pool of Bolton, Milliman, and Chiron. I was on the selection committee. I preferred Chiron, but I was unaware of the scoring of others.
Who was the selection committee? Like, is this a comptroller audit of the actuarial processes? Is this an annual audit?
It's a city audit of the actuarial processes, and there were representatives from all of the individual systems. There was at least one representative from OMB, one from the law department. I can circulate a list if you'd like. There were about 8 or 9 folks involved.
That makes sense. Who's paying for it?
It's a very voluminous report we will get. If anyone's interested in the previous report, I have extra copies. They run to about 8 inches of stacked paper.
Love a digital copy if possible.
Yeah, they don't they don't supply that. My guess
Actually, I
is
think I
because
have
the
a-
file's too big.
I think I
Yeah,
have
if you
it. Was
have-
on the controller's website.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, I should have a copy. So I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aday. I'm sorry I didn't know. I was not aware of that.
All good.
I can still
Thank you,
supply
Sandy.
hard copies to you if you'd like. I've got extras. Boxes of
I don't think I ever want a hard copy of anything ever again.
Yeah, you're a wise man.
Any other questions from the board for Sandy? Hearing none, I will move on to item number 4, which is the internal audit director's update. Aday, would you like to begin?
Yes, thank you very much. So, are you able to see my screen, everyone?
Yes.
All right, so on today's agenda, we will cover the completed audits that are ongoing. And if time permits, I will go into the reports, follow-up reports on previous audit findings. I do have that as a separate presentation, just because it's getting really large, so I had to break it up. All right, so the first audit we're covering today is the payroll procedures audit. This audit was reported out in March of this year. The audit is based on the New York City Controller's Directive 13. So the Directive 13 provides the internal controls and procedures that agencies must follow when recording employee time, preparing timekeeping data for payroll, and also when distributing payrolls. So these activities I just mentioned are generally referred to as payroll procedures activities, but there are 4 primary functions involved. So there's personnel, there's timekeeping, there's the actual payroll processing, and then there's distribution of the paychecks. So as far as BERS HR is concerned, they play a very limited role when it comes to the actual processing of the payrolls, because the DOE is primarily responsible for that. And then when it comes to distribution of the physical paychecks, most, if not all, of BERS employees are on EFT, so there's pretty much little or no distribution in that regard. So for the audit approach, we conducted interviews with personnel of the HR. I think we spoke to pretty much everyone, except for the L&D director for this audit, because it's a very small team. And then we also reviewed documentation. To go into high-level details in terms of personnel actions, we looked at how they're authorizing additions to payroll, deletions from payroll, changes to payroll and compensation. We looked at approval and documentation of new hires and their compensation and changes to compensation as well. We tested these areas to make sure that they had proper approvals and documentation in place, and to also ensure that there was segregation of duties. And then for timekeeping, we looked at the timekeeping records. We looked at how they were being approved and recorded. We looked at overtime and how they're being processed and compensated. And again, in those areas, we looked for proper segregation, proper approval, and proper documentation. So overall, when you compare, because this is the second time that we're doing this audit, this is an annual audit that the Controller's Office requires. So when you compare with the last audit that we did in 2020, we noted some improvement in the area of approval of timekeeping records. In the first audit, there were about 7,000 unapproved records in a 1-year period. Compared to this audit, there are about 1,346, I think. So we did note improvement in that area. However, there are still weaknesses in the controls because they still continue to have unapproved records. In terms of rectifying the findings from the last audit, after we presented the report to HR, they went back to 2012 and identified an additional 20,000 plus records that weren't approved, and they started the process of approving those records. They did run into trouble because some of those records were really old, and some payroll activities were triggered as a result as they tried to approve those. So they had some discussions with CyberShift and determined that it was best to focus on approving the managerial time, because that's where there's the most impact at the time of separation. But altogether, they approved about 6,000 of those, now almost 30,000 records so far, and they hope to approve the rest of them by October of this year. So now, focusing on this audit, in 2022, so we were looking at compliance with Directive 13. We also looked at the processes around wage establishment and other related personnel changes. And we also sought to find areas where they could improve. The audit period for this audit was from July 1st of 2020 to June 30th of 2021. So there are 4 findings for this audit. The first one pertains to temporary employee timekeeping. We reviewed the hours that were reported on the temp agency invoices in CyberShift and the temp agency payroll portal. So the temp employees are required to enter their time in CyberShift and in the temp agency portal, and then their supervisor goes in and approves the time, which will trigger the invoice, and then BERS pays the invoice. So at the time of the audit, there were 12 temps working for BERS, and we pulled 15 weekly payrolls for testing. When we reviewed those payrolls, we found that 3 employees did not record their time in CyberShift as required. 2 employees had time on the agency invoices that didn't match the CyberShift records. And then 6 of the records were not approved in CyberShift. So to rectify all of this, we recommended that they develop a policy for temporary employee timekeeping that will clearly outline the timekeeping requirements. We also recommended that in that policy, they develop a process for reconciling the employee time records between what the agency portal is billing us for and what we are recording in CyberShift, just to make sure that everything is aligned before payment is made to the agency. HR did let me know that they already completed this policy that we recommended. So
Quick question on the first finding, if you're moving on to the second one. So there's 2 places where the temps enter their time.
Yes,
Are the supervisors also approving their time in 2 places?
I believe so. I may not be exact on that, but I believe that they're required to approve. In CyberShift for sure, they're required to approve. In the temp agency, I believe they're also required to approve.
Is someone from HR, like Michelle or Teen, on to answer that question?
No, they're not here.
Sandy, do you know?
What was the question? I stepped away for a second.
Sorry, Sharon. I was just asking, so there's 2 places where the temps have to enter their time, right? It's in CyberShift and in this temp agency portal, but where do the supervisors also have to approve the time in 2 places?
Alex, you approve next time. He's shaking his head no. And I know when I was doing it last year from one of our temps, it was just in the temp agency's time.
Interesting.
I think the CyberShift thing is new. Having the temps
why is
clock
that?
in and out there. Why
Is
is
there a
it new?
particular reason for that? Is there because we want to do a reconciliation against the billing, or why are temps clocking into CyberShift?
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
There you go.
Okay, all right. I'm trying to sort through my audio settings. I apologize for that. I was talking and okay. So this is actually news to me. I supervise a temp. I do not put his time in CyberShift. If I need to, let me know, please. This is the first I hear of it.
Right. So this is one of the responses that we got on this is that the CyberShift record keeping is not relevant, right? And the approvals that we're missing were predominantly in CyberShift. So this is why we told them to develop a policy that clearly outlines what the requirements are, because as we note here, some employees are not recording in CyberShift while some are.
So I think the relevance of CyberShift is that an employee is actually going up and walking to the badge reader and clocking in versus when they're entering their time with their temp agency, you can just type it in at the end of the week, whatever time you want.
Yeah, I definitely
So-
understand that. I guess I'm just trying to understand why if there is any reconciliation between those 2 at any point in time, or why there would, because it sounds to me like having 2 systems to track your time in sounds annoying
Right.
and duplicative.
Well, if you
And-
don't do the one that attaches to the temp agency, I think they wouldn't get paid. So that one I think is absolutely required.
And I guess that's where I'm going with this, right? Like, why are temps clocking into CyberShift? Just so we can have the record to do nothing with it? I guess I want to
There are
understand what.
issues,
So
with
you can-
potentially people stealing time, saying that they were working when they weren't, that
Mhm.
kind of thing.
I mean, you still have the same issues. You can always clock in and out when you want. It's not like badging in and out doesn't necessarily obviate that concern. I guess it seems a little duplicative of systems and efforts. So it sounds as if the the HR policy was changed and approved a day.
Yes, I
And
haven't.
what was it changed to?
The policy I did not receive or review because the follow-up period was not up yet, right? This was just something that they just informed me that they had developed. But in terms of reviewing the policy, I have not reviewed it. I intend to do that when this audit is actually due for follow-up. Now, that said, during the audit, we did note that there is no reconciliation between the payroll records and the invoice, because I spoke to Chitra, who pays the invoices, and Chitra let me know that they rely on HR to ensure that the records are accurate. What they do is they get the approval and they make the payment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and then when I spoke to HR was of the impression that Chitra's team was doing this reconciliation. So this is why we told them to develop that policy and clearly outline what's required and include a process for reconciling the time and properly approving the invoices before they're paid.
This is Tony. What area of responsibility is responsible? Like, who's the manager, the senior manager overseeing this area of work?
So it will be the line of business manager. So whoever supervises or manages the temp employee would be responsible for approving their time.
Right. So
And
for
then
Alex, for example, sounds like he has a temp, Nick, who is working for him, and he approves the time in the
agency.
temp agency portal, but not in CyberShift. A day when you said that there was no reconciliation between payroll records and invoice, do you mean between CyberShift and the invoice, or between the temp agency portal and the invoice?
It would be between CyberShift and the temp agency because the invoice is solely driven by what's in the temp agency portal. So when we did our testing, everything in the temp agency portal matched the invoice, but everything in the temp agency portal did not match CyberShift.
Okay.
So technically, how many managers or line business managers could be involved in overseeing this? What's the number?
So there's ops, there's membership services, member communications, there's IT. So we're talking about maybe 6 departments.
I see.
So 6 directors, and they have deputy directors, 6 or 7, or give or take.
And so is the recommendation to change or improve or amend the policy so that to provide clearer guidance to these managers?
Yes. So we told them to outline what the requirements are for temporary employee timekeeping, so that everybody's on the same page on, are we using CyberShift? How are we using CyberShift? Things like that. And then also, very importantly, to have a reconciliation to make sure we're not just paying invoices. We want to make sure that the time is accurate on those invoices.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there any, I understand that you haven't reviewed the policy that's been promulgated by HR yet. I think the line of questioning that Tony just advanced is smart, and I just want to make sure that if we are going to require CyberShift, we should use it. And there should be, again, if we're going to require it, there should be a reconciliation. If we're not going to require it, then obviously no need for the reconciliation. Also, only 12 temps. Sandy, I thought there were more than 12 temps working at BERS.
This was as of the time of the audit. So we've reported out this audit in March of 2022. I believe our field work ended around January-ish. So it's not current as of today. That number is not current as of today.
But 12 temps
Be
as of
current.
January 22.
Yeah.
All right. I have no further questions on finding number 1.
Okay. Yeah, so our field work ended on February 22nd of 2022, so. All right, so finding number 2 pertains to approval of overtime. We noted that overtime is not always approved in writing and in advance of actually performing the overtime. So we recommended that they ensure that overtime is approved in writing prior to overtime being performed, where operationally possible, and where not operationally possible, to ensure that they are approving this immediately after, as soon as possible. So when we were doing this test, we noticed that a few managers had many hours worked, right? So we decided to pull some of those records, and we pulled the managers that had more than 15 hours in one work day. So we noted that 21 of those timesheets had largely overstated hours, and it was due to manual input of their time. So we noted that some employees were like had their day ending at like 2 o'clock in the morning, or random hours, or 4:30 in the morning a.m. So obviously they were trying to input like 4:30 p.m. or something like that and put a.m. So we tested those to make sure that they weren't paid in any way, and they were not paid. So there's that. And then we reviewed overtime for non-managerial employees who actually get compensated for overtime worked. And we found that 12 of those were not properly approved and were not compensated. So we provided that information to HR, and they're reviewing those to make sure that they're properly approved and properly compensated. We also recommended that they develop a policy for overtime and timekeeping to reiterate what the overtime policy is, what is required in terms of prior approval and things like that. We also recommended that they include a note in CyberShift where possible that indicates the reason for the overtime. We recommended that they do a review of some past overtime records to see if they were properly compensated and to determine if employees were due any money or time. And then finally, we recommended that people actually punch the clock or clock out rather than inputting their time manually, to avoid that error that comes with the manual input of overtime.
Is there a cap or ceiling on overtime hours?
I believe that there is a cap on overtime hours.
There's a
for-
budget allocation.
Got it.
Yeah, and there's a waiver that is required when they exceed that
Got it,
cap,
okay.
and that's for non-managers.
Got it, yeah.
So finding number 3 pertains to the salary ranges of employees. So the DCAS, Department of Citywide Administrative Services, is responsible for establishing the salary ranges for all city agencies. And those salary ranges are usually adjusted for collective bargaining increases. So we did a test of the entire population of BERS employees at the time to determine if the salaries were within the approved ranges, and where they were not, we wanted to see if there were any documented approvals in place. So of the 120 employees that we sampled, we found that 4 were above the salary ranges. The amounts were not alarming, but they were over and therefore non-compliant. And we determined that the reason for this is that these employees had received discretionary raises from BERS, and then subsequently had the scheduled union increases, which took them over the range. So our recommendation here was that BERS should ensure that, when they're planning discretionary raises, to take into account any future scheduled collective bargaining increases, to make sure that the employee doesn't go over. And we also recommended that they, discuss with the executive office and management, and possibly with DCAS, to see if any action is required on those salaries that are over. And then lastly, we did a repeat test of
Oh,
the,
hi. I'm sorry. This is Tom. I had two questions about this one.
okay.
So did you find that there were any employees that were outside of the range because they weren't getting paid enough, right? So you found that there were some that were being paid too much, but did you find that there were any employees that were below the range as well, right? Because generally there's an upper and a lower range limit, and I just wondered if there were any employees that were below that range as well.
No, the answer is no.
Okay. And my second question is, if you are talking about employees that are outside of the sort of upper range because they also got a discretionary raise, um, what's the I think where I'm going with this is I wouldn't want someone that got a discretionary raise, because usually a discretionary raise for me is kind of merit based, right? Like you did an exceptionally good job, so we wanted to reward you for that with a raise, right? I wouldn't want someone that got a raise for that to then be penalized because they now fall outside of um, sort of a salary range for their particular position. So, is there any information around the people that got these discretionary raises? Like, because I don't want it to harm them in the future, right? Because somebody can say, well, they're outside of the range, so next raise cycle they don't get a raise until they get back in this sort of range of salaries, right? So I don't want them to be rewarded in one way and then penalized in another.
Right. So one of the options, and we were very careful in making our recommendations, but something that could be done is if an employee is performing exceptionally or outside of their range, they could be offered another title with a bigger range where possible. And we're in no way trying to limit employee salaries, but what we're advising is when those increases are being considered, they need to keep in mind that there are ranges that they cannot exceed. In the cases that we found, they range from $36 to $378. So no major alarms went off here, but it was obvious that this was not something that was on the radar of HR. So we just want them to be cognizant of that when they're considering these discretionary raises. I guess the good news is that these increases, even though they lapse for a while, when they pick up, they go back to where but they're retroactive, right? So the ranges will eventually catch up when they're updated, but at the point in time that we were looking at, these employees were over.
And I'd just like to add something here, Tom. We have, under, agreement with the city and our trustees, not provided discretionary raises for at least the last 2 years. I believe it may be the last 3 years. And so these are probably, I mean, I don't know these specific examples, but these are likely people who got discretionary raises many years ago. And when contract salary increases came out, they were bumped above their title ranges. We're actually quite disciplined about identifying people who deserve better comp because they're highly qualified, and in order to get that better comp, they have to qualify for an improved title position, either through testing or through qualifications through DCAS qualifications. So, we've actually been pretty disciplined about this, and I guess that's why there are very few non-compliant compensation levels.
Thank you, Sandy. I will just say that I appreciate also the position that if someone is performing at
Tom, we lost you.
oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, I was just saying that I appreciate the position that if someone is performing at a level that kind of sets this situation up, that you're seriously looking at whether or not they're in the right position, right? So, so I definitely support that.
Okay, so finding number 4 was a repeat test of timesheets to see if they were properly approved. So we looked at timesheets from July 1st of 2020 to June 30th of 2021. And compared to 7,000 records in a prior time period, we found 1,300 records. So we did note improvement in this area, even though some weaknesses remain. HR sends out biweekly emails to remind approvers of their responsibility to approve time. There was also a cybershift training for approvers as well. This was sometime last year. And then CyberShift now has a new feature where they will be alerting approvers if they have unapproved time for their employees. So that's everything for this audit. Are there any questions before I move on to the next one?
Just wanted to make a comment a day that obviously there's a ton of progress made on the timesheets front. Speaking from a DOE perspective, I know that we have a lot of challenges with getting timesheets approved in a timely manner as well. So I think it is commendable, the emphasis that's been put. I know that when employees offboard, having unapproved time can be a huge challenge and kind of just adds to the offboarding process. You know, when someone like your supervisor leaves and you can't even go back and get those timesheet approvals, that can be a huge administrative hurdle as well. So I think, you know, I approximated a denomination or a denominator for the last year and this year. I mean, it seems like the issue rate has gone from something like 31 or 32% down to 5% for the audit period for this year. So I think that's tremendously commendable. And you know, all the efforts going to approve time going back to 2012, also commendable. And I wish the team the best of luck going back and approving time in 2012, almost a decade ago. Alan, I see your hand is up, so I'll stop talking.
Thank you, Russ. Just a quick question, just to understand CyberShift a little bit better. Is it just straight across the board when you're clocking in, clocking out? You basically have to sign in like everyone else does, or there's another feature within CyberShift where you input the hours? Just want to see, because I mean, my understanding of CyberShift is trying to keep a lot of people honest in regards to you can only clock in on a DOE approved equipment or a approved hardware. Is it the same with this also?
Yes, so there are 2 ways. You could clock in at I don't know what they call them, at a terminal that's at every location, or you can clock in on the computer. Prior to the pandemic, you could only clock in while on the DOE network, but during the pandemic, they created a new website for all the city resources, and employees can go on the web to clock in. So you don't have to be signed into the DOE network to be able to clock in.
That was the Info Hub you're talking about, right? Or something else?
Yes, I think InfoHub has multiple links to get into NICAP, CyberShift. Everything you couldn't access prior to the pandemic outside of the network is now accessible outside of the network.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so the second other audit that we're going to talk about today is an audit of the operations of the call center. This audit was reported out on April 19th of this year. The objectives of the audit were to assess compliance with call center policies and procedures and the controls that they have in place. And then we also wanted to analyze the call center data and performance metrics, and then see if we could identify opportunities for improvement. So just to give some background, the BERS call center is relatively new. It was established in 2018 and moved into the Member Communications Department, which was formed around 2019. And there were only 8 employees at the call center at the time of this audit. So throughout the audit, we took into account the size, which is relatively small, and the maturity level of the call center, which is relatively young. So to gain an understanding of the processes within the call center, we held interviews with call center management. We reviewed their policies and procedures. We looked at their training materials and other relevant documentation. So once we identified what their key processes were, we started to do our testing on call center data. We wanted to determine if their key processes were being performed in accordance to their established policies and procedures, and whether they were in alignment with best practices. And then we also did a separate review of their policies and procedures against call center best practices. We did identify some performance gaps and some opportunities for improvement. Overall, we noted that as a young department, quote unquote young, they've had a lot of progress in terms of documenting their processes. So they have their SOPM, they have their detailed call scripts, their policies and procedures, their training materials. And we thought that this was notable because those are the kind of things that you need in place to kind of set the foundation for building up a new department, to have those kind of structures in place to be able to effectively transfer knowledge to new employees or employees transferring in and things like that. And also to set the desired attitudes and cultures that the call center wants to build. So we looked at call center activities that occurred between October 2020 and September 2021. So the first thing that we noted was the very high rate of lost calls. When we looked at the call center data between October 2020 and September of 2021, we noted that 43% of incoming calls were answered, while 57% were either abandoned by the member, missed by BERS, or dropped. We attributed this high rate of lost calls to understaffing within the call center, the need for additional coaching and training and performance improvement. So we recommended that they give express priority to properly staffing the call center. When we did our analysis, we determined that they would need at least, and this was a very prudent estimate, at least 12 employees on the phones to be able to answer more of those calls. And that's based on the call volume that was received during the period that we reviewed. Sally did let me know that they've been hiring and they had some offers out to some potential employees. And then we also recommended that they develop a standard training handbook that was very specific to BERS, that would include information on practices at BERS, like BERS laws, tier plans, and things like that, that the employees could refer to when they're on these calls. And we also recommended that they frequently schedule meetings with the call center staff where they're sharing feedback and performance information with the staff.
So can we talk about hiring in the call center? There's you said 8 full-time employees during the audit period, right, Ade?
Yes.
And were they all full-time or were they temps? Do you know?
That I don't know. I might have that in my work papers, but that I don't know off the top of my head. But regardless, they were all working like as full-time employees.
They're full-time, Russell.
Okay. So they're all full-time employees receiving benefits, presumably?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
As far as hiring is concerned, I tried to go back in preparation for this meeting to the last hiring update I received, which I think was in January. What is the call center staffed at now?
I can give you that in just a second. Actually, I talked about it at the last board meeting and distributed a memo on that. Hold on just a second. Let me find that memo.
Yeah, I'll look for it as well.
I get an update just before every board meeting on this, so I haven't gotten one for the 21st yet. It would have been 2 weeks ago. Huh. Gotta look for a better word.
So as of June, they had 2 vacancies remaining. I don't have information on what the total would be. But they did let me know that they had 2 vacancies remaining.
Okay.
Huh.
And that I believe there's a 21 approved headcount for member communications in general. I'm not sure how much of that staff is allocated specifically to the call center. But I want to make sure I have a good understanding. The recommendation from this audit was a minimum of 12, and we've got 8 as of January during the audit period. 2 vacancies remaining. I just want to make sure that I know what the figure is that's still outstanding for hiring.
Well, the figure that's outstanding is 2. What the total will be after they get those 2, I can get back to you on. But as of June, this meeting, my last follow-up was in May, getting ready for this meeting. They had 2 vacancies.
Okay.
As soon as I find it, I will insert the information into our conversation, but I suggest we move on.
Agreed.
And I think also the question I had was, we started with 8. Was the number we needed 12, or did we need 12 additional?
12 in total, and that's
12
based
in
on,
total. Okay.
yeah, and that's based on the call volume between October of 2020 and September 2021, and that's 12, a minimum of 12.
Okay. Yeah, and with 2 vacancies, that would mean that we basically picked up 2 more.
Well, so during the audit, the call center was already aware of their staff shortage, and we're already, I think they were in the process of getting approval for headcount. What that final approved number is, I do not have in front of me. Again, I can find that out and let you know what the total number will be when they get the 2 that's approved.
So,
Thank you. And
so the aggregate
Okay.
of headcount for member services is 16. I believe that currently 8 on the calls, and they have supervisors and they have text and email response staff. I'll get you the firm numbers. I don't have the minor detail, but we have always operated the call center at a substandard number of headcount because we just don't have the approved headcount that we need. And that is something that we have, talked about for the last few years since establishing the call center.
Yeah, I was curious why, when we were talking about the last audit, there's only 12 temps, and if I recall correctly, your approved temp head count is somewhere in the 20s, if not 30s.
We can't put a temp person on a phone call with a member for multiple reasons, including they don't have access to systems that might be required potentially, and they just don't have the experience. We understand that, while we may have had 8 full-time call center reps 6 months ago, there's turnover. We have hired aggressively, and probably 30% of our current call center reps are not really qualified to speak to members yet. I mean, they may be talking to some, but we're still training them up. And there is a very sophisticated training program created by Sally Rivera, Allison, and by Lydia Amen in our learning and development program. But it takes a while before we can have a new call center person be effective with a member. They can't just start answering the phone.
I mean,
Right.
respectfully, Sandy, the law department, or not the law department, your legal division has a temp working for them right now, handling a lot of what I understand to be fairly complex matters.
Yep,
I am surprised to say that
he's completely qualified for it.
the temps are good enough for your legal department, but not for the call center.
Those are different levels of staffing, Russell.
Yeah, I agree, and I would expect that. I think you know where I'm going with this.
Well,
I'm just surprised by that assessment.
Well, so here is the challenge, Russ. A lawyer receiving inquiry on a question does not have to respond immediately on the phone. A call center rep who doesn't have the ability to respond immediately to a member's call is largely more of a problem. It drives call center repeats, right? So we have, when you see that we're
Which
only
training
answering
should handle,
43% of the calls, right? If you look at
Right.
if you see that, a lot of the drops are people waiting because we're short-staffed and they won't
Mhm.
wait for an hour and a half.
Mhm.
And people who are calling back because they're uncomfortable with the response they're getting.
Can you quantify that at all?
We can quantify drops. We
Can you quantify what you just said about people calling back because they weren't comfortable with the answer they got the first time through?
Anecdotally, we can do that.
That's not what I asked.
Anecdotally, but no, of course we can't. But anecdotally, we get people who call regularly with the same question. Regularly.
And shouldn't training address that?
Yep. Got to give it time though.
Good. So this is Tony. So I think that the training and the performance management aspects of this should have equal weight to just the staffing, because I think at some point you're going to reach the staffing levels, but that may not equate to the, if I'm hearing correctly, to the quality of the lost calls or the service itself. So I just want to make sure there's a balance. And we're probably going to need a new remediation target date.
Yeah, and my point is actually a pretty simple one. When we hire a new call center rep, and we've hired, got them in front of me, 4 in the last 3 months, you got to give them 3 to 6 months to get up to speed. I mean, they're not highly effective for a period of time. We have to train them. We have to give them experience. We have to get them, ready to respond to member inquiry. And so, in addition to the fact that we don't have sufficient number of allocated headcount, the headcount that we have filled needs to be given time.
I agree with you, Sandy. I just said by the next audit, hopefully these things will balance out, and then we'll see, some numbers, so we could have, if this is the baseline, then where we go from there. But I'm just concerned that we just focus on the understaffing, and it's more than that. And I know you know that, so.
Yep. And we will provide, we'll provide trustees information from CEM benchmarking on this. We monitor it both from our internal audit ability and through CEM benchmarking and through the management of the call center and reporting internally. So this is just one view of what's happening, and we will provide additional information.
Thank you.
Yep.
Ellen, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, with what's already, like, with the changes that, so like the increased headcount, the focus on training and making sure that these call center representatives are up to speed. Have we seen any improvement in what was it, 23% lost call rates? Like, have we seen any improvement?
57%, I believe the number was.
Oh, yeah, it wasn't a really high number. I was just wondering, have we seen any improvement with the changes that were recommended?
Well, it's
It'll take time, but have we seen any permanent change?
I'm sorry, you were breaking up at the end there, but so we will, when the next time we have an audit of this area, we will be able to compare the results of that audit with this one. But as of now, this is the most current information that we have in this area. So remember,
Thank you.
this was as of April of this year. But it was
So
looking
only
at,
2 months ago.
yeah, but looking at data from between 2020 and 2021, so.
Right.
I have one more question, but I want to go to Alan because he has his hand up.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Russ. Very quickly, I'm more focused on the training. I know headcount is important and you have to get the people, but also training makes a big difference, right? And I agree with Sandy in regards that it does take time to acclimate them, train them, and get them up to speed. But is there a good, or have we looked at how the reps incoming, onboarding, training are done correctly? Do we know if, are they recorded? I know certain things may be sensitive, but are there recorded sessions to give them an example of how to be a good customer service rep? Because I've asked a lot of people, waiting time is from 40 minutes to an hour and a half to 3 hours. Okay. Some of them have attitudes. They don't like the way they get the answer, and what Sandy said, they repeat and call back again. And some of them don't even bother anymore because you know why? I don't want to wait anymore. So crap in, crap out, the way I look at it. Is there anything looking at how they are trained, professional development and everything else to make sure that they are good reps or will become good reps?
Yes, so we do have actually a finding that's specifically for training of the reps, right? So we did look at the training plans and the documents that they have. Even though this is going into that finding now, but even, L&D develops these training plans for the call center. And they looked good, but they hadn't been implemented because of COVID. And so during that period, they were just doing generic LinkedIn trainings. But we did recommend that there appeared to be some level of disconnect between what was being provided by L&D and what the call center desired, right? So we recommended that the call center be more involved in developing the training content that was being provided by L&D. We also wanted them to be more involved in the actual scheduling of these trainings to make sure, because there were times when they were just giving the training to their staff and call center management wasn't allowed to be there or wasn't privy to the contents of those trainings because they I don't know, wanted the employees to express freely or something like that. But we did recommend that the call center management have a more hands-on approach when developing those training contents and training schedules. So short answer is yes, there is training, but we know that areas where they can improve on the content and the implementation of those trainings.
Thank you. And is that one of the items on the audit, or that's
Yeah.
actually not something, because I can't
Number
really see.
4.
Number 4, right? Okay. Training
Yeah.
policies. Thank you. Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so finding number 2 pertains to touch points. So touch points are the notes that the call center reps will take when they talk to members if there's an issue. And those touch points are supposed to track the issue to resolution. And based on the call center procedures, there were specific requirements that had to be in those touch points. So things like identifying who the caller was, what action was required, reason for the call, and things like that. So we reviewed touch points between November 2020 and October 2021 with the goal of determining if there was compliance with the call center policy for touch points. So we noted that they only created touch points for 25% of the calls that were answered. And delving into those touch points that were actually that they actually created, we found that 5 did not identify the caller. Well, various things, but instead of going into details, there were certain discrepancies or requirements that were supposed to be recorded with the touch points that were missing. So we brought this to the attention of the call center, and we recommended that they reiterate the touch point documentation requirements based on their policy. We recommended that they request from Vitech the functionality that will allow them to track touch points, because what's the point of having them if you're not able to track which ones are resolved, which ones are outstanding, and be able to report on that. And then we also noticed that the touch points didn't necessarily have the member number of the caller. So it was kind of that we had some trouble there trying to tie back the touch points to the callers. So we recommended that the touch points include member number and that they also do a periodic review of touch points to ensure that the requirements are being met. So moving on to finding number 3, which pertains to the data analysis for the call center. So for the most part, they get their data analysis from the data analytics department. So we reviewed past reports. There haven't been reports recently due to changes within the data analytics department. But we noted that the metrics that were being used to measure the performance of the call center were not necessarily in alignment with their goals. So the call center wants to focus on the quality of their calls versus the quantity. And the metrics that were being used were more focused on things like the call length and the call speed, which is more of quantity. So we did recommend an alignment of their performance measurement metrics with their goals and the goals of BERS in general. We recommended some metrics that they could use to measure customer satisfaction, which focuses more on quality versus quantity. So things like first call resolution, customer satisfaction score, and average abandonment rate were metrics that we recommended that they focus on. And then,
Can I just ask on this one real quick? It says the end of fiscal 22. Is that realistic for new data analyses to change the call center's quantitative and qualitative goals
I
and
personally,
reorient action plans?
right, given the current state of, because data analytics just got a director, I think there are only 2 employees, if I'm not mistaken, within that department.
Right.
And I'm also working with them on trying to streamline their reporting to various departments. I don't think that that's going to necessarily be a target date that they will meet.
Right.
You know, at the time of the audit, it was okay for them to have that aspiration, but I don't know that they can do that at this point. The next follow-up will be, I believe, in August. So at that time, I will find out where they are in terms of working with data analytics to kind of adjust their metrics.
Okay.
So finding number 4 pertains to training policies, procedures, and requirements. So we did review the training plan documents that were prepared by L&D. Like I said, they appeared to be well organized and could be effective, but they hadn't been implemented by the call center. The call center did express to us that they needed training specifically around institutional knowledge. They also let us know that the trainings that were provided to them are helpful and relevant, but they're not specifically addressing the needs that the employees have expressed for institutional knowledge training. And this was also captured in a recent survey that was given to the call center employees. I think this was during the employee experience and retention audit. We also noted that the trainings that they did receive were not properly documented. So we recommended that, like I said before, that the call center be more involved in actually developing the content of the training, in scheduling the training. And then we also recommended that they actually track the training. So this way they have like a program for their new hires or even for their current employees. So they know what trainings employees should have, who has received those trainings, what trainings are outstanding, and just kind of organize their processes around training and documentation of the trainings.
Alan, you have your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. It's more related to 3. I was a little late in raising my hand, so my apologies. What reporting system or what system does the rep use to log the calls? And is it or can it be vamped to make it intuitive where certain fields are required? Because then that satisfies, excuse me, I can't even speak. That satisfies like certain touch points on required fields that are missing. I see, data analytic, analysis and, providing metrics, but is that something they're controlling in regards to the logging system too, or the ticketing system?
So the data analytics pull their reports from the Cisco system, right? So that's the system that the call center calls run on. That's the platform that runs the calls for the call center. So that's the system that they use. They download those reports and then they create the charts and the tables and everything, they visualize that for the call center. And then in terms of the touch points, they're recorded in CPMS. So any changes to the touch points will have to go through Vitek, which could be challenging. So we do recognize that it could be a challenge for them to get all the features that they need on the touch points.
So if anything, it's not bridging from one system to another. If anything, it would be a manual to kind of gather both.
Yes, it would be a manual.
Okay.
Is there anything that can be done with Cisco to do it in the interim? Is there stuff that can be turned on with the platform that's running the call center?
I would have to speak to data analytics about that. But like I said, so the employees that used to run these reports there's sort of a pause on this reporting. So the employees are no longer with BERS, and David is trying to streamline these reports to automate what he can.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, he's trying to work with the directors to see what reports they're interested in, because it makes no sense to just pump out a bunch of reports that no one is looking at.
Yeah, I completely agree, especially if the data isn't what it needs to be.
Right.
I guess I'd be who manages the Cisco platform itself? Is that Sally and Allison?
It will be Sally and Allison, and they're supported by IT with that system.
Okay. I'd be curious to know if there's any way that, I mean, it sounds like there's 2 systems, to Alan's point. You have Cisco running the call center, and then the touch points are actually recorded in CPMS. I guess I would be curious for some of the new metrics that are described in Finding 3, if that's stuff that can be implemented with Cisco as opposed to CPMS, and then CPMS is its whole other thing, which I think we'll probably get to later in this report.
Right.
Oh,
So, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. I can wait for you to answer that one.
Yeah, so I was going to say that in terms of integrating any of that with CPMS, I do see challenges there. It would have to pass through Vitek, and it could take time. So far, CPMS is not the most flexible in terms of communicating with other systems. So that could be a potential roadblock.
Yeah, I actually the question I have actually connects for me 3 and 4 together, right? So it seems to me that there's 2 challenges, right? One is the system, right? So how do we embed or have the necessary touch points in a system so that when call center reps are having conversations with members, that's being accurately reflected in a way that it shows up in reports in ways that we can do stuff with it. So that's one part. And then the other part is sort of how do we make sure also that the reps themselves are adequately trained and have the institutional knowledge necessary to be able to have effective conversations with members, right? So there's those 2 things. And I'm thinking while those 2 issues are being raised, is there a way to embed, right, the institutional knowledge into the system in such a way that, you know, someone that may not have the institutional knowledge can be assisted by the system, right? So if they're having conversations with customers, even newer folks that are in the process of being trained can still be effective because the system itself has the knowledge built into it. So if you don't know the questions to ask, then the system will prompt you to ask a particular question.
I mean,
Our systems are just not that sophisticated at this point. You know, Cisco records everything, and the data is accumulating, and we're just not utilizing that data at the moment. And the reality is that touch points have to be physically entered into CPMS. It's the current status.
I understand that. And I actually, you know, I get it, but I'm just wondering if they're not that sophisticated, right? Is there a way that we can make the investment in systems so that they're sophisticated?
I mean, that's something that could be explored with Vitech. I do know that for other more mature organizations with, you know, larger call centers, they definitely have intelligence software that guides their reps on calls. But like Sandy said, CPMS is not that system. It may require procurement of a separate system, but that's something that would have to be explored further.
Okay, and like I said, I really asked the question because I get that, you know, the whole conversation around a call center is still a relatively new one, right? So we're still in a phase where, you know, on some level, like there's a system that we're using, and what we're finding is that the system itself, and the system itself, and part of it is the level of training that our call center reps have, don't necessarily meet the needs that our members have, right? And since we are still in a relatively early phase of this, you know, maybe there's a way that we can explore and build a system that does meet those needs in a more holistic way.
Noted. I'll speak to Sally and see what her thoughts are regarding that.
Thank you, Tom. And Ade, I would to add on to what Tom just said, I would be curious if any of that can be done through Cisco as opposed to through CPMS. You know, not necessarily related to the touch points, because I understand the touch points have to be physically recorded and physically entered into a system. But yeah, I mean, we're, you know, kind of going back to the first audit that we discussed. If we have multiple systems tracking data, let's make sure that we're actually using both of those systems to the fullest of their ability. Before we move on to finding number 5, I just wanted to ask a quick follow-up question on the training. Finding number 4. The current training, I understand it's generic LinkedIn trainings, and that plans had been developed for the call center but weren't implemented due to COVID. I guess, you know, I just want to understand like what the current training is. I mean, a lot of trustees have asked questions about onboarding, and whether or not that's being done appropriately. I just, you know, Sandy, you rattled off a couple things in an earlier conversation about people who are managing the trainings. I've heard the acronym L&D. I just, before we go into like how to improve it, I think I need a better understanding of why the COVID trainings, why trainings didn't happen during COVID, and what we're actually doing right now, so I can understand what needs to be improved.
So this information is a bit dated, right? So there has been a cooperation between MCU and L&D to create a specifically targeted call center training program, which utilized work done by Siegel Marco to create SOPMs and McLean to support the creation of a training program. The training program was implemented a few months ago. They have gone through at least one evolution of that training program. We can get to the details on this, but this information is dated a bit. So, in the first quarter, we did a complete revamp. Well, it was perhaps started before the first quarter. Complete revamp of the call center training program, and it was the first targeted department because we knew it was the most in need and with the most new employees. We can get you information about what that training was. I mean, it was video recorded, significant number of PowerPoint slides, a lot of in-person training, and even interactive work with individual call center reps on sample calls. So, we can get a briefing on that if you'd like. I'm just not the person to do that because I won't do it justice.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. We probably ought to have vertical heads on these calls if the audit touches on their area going forward. That day was that training properly documented?
No, well, no, I don't know about the one Sandy is speaking of. This is subsequent to the audit. But during the audit, we noted that they weren't properly documenting their trainings.
Okay.
We recommended that they develop a program where they're tracking all the training. So that way, a call center is one of those functions that should be standardized as much as possible, right? So we want to ensure that all the employees are receiving the same trainings. Those who need more, they could focus and give them what they need specifically. But at a minimum, they should all have certain trainings under their belt. So
is there like a best practice for how quickly a call center rep ought to be able to be onboarded for like larger call centers? Like I know Sandy, you had referenced 3 to 6 months. It just seems extraordinarily long.
No, 6 months actually, and the service level agreement would be to answer 80% of calls in 20 seconds, so with a 20-second wait time. So like I said at the beginning, we kept all of this in mind, but we also kept in mind that this is a very small and new call center. Right. So while reviewing against best practice, we weren't holding them to those standards, but that's something that they could aspire to. And we talked about that at the exit conference, right? So as the call center matures and grows, they could start to focus on those sort of industry standard metrics and more quantitative data.
Thank you.
One last question around that. So, I am concerned that with a relatively small call center, right, with a relatively high turnover rate, that it will be difficult to maintain institutional knowledge, right? Because it seems like the question or the concern that people are raising, at least from the call center, is how do we get the institutional knowledge, right? So that's one part. But I think the other part is how do we retain people in a way where we can keep that institutional knowledge? Because it just seems to me like there are going to be ongoing issues with, people having the degree of sort of embedded institutional knowledge, if you want to, I keep using it, to be able to be effective in an ongoing way. So I just want to make sure that, in this, we're trying to also retain the thing that we're training in our employees.
I would like to offer you comfort on that, Tom, but I don't believe I can. We have had a hard time hiring. We have had significant turnover. And, understand that on a macro basis, we believe, the staff believes, and management believes that we are understaffed against the obligations we have towards members, and that the city is okay with that. I think that you know, personally, I believe that the city across many agencies is comfortable with that. It doesn't view member, staff, agency service of their clients as a priority which supersedes budget limitations. And I understand that, right? And I think we have to understand that if we are to live within these limitations. And I think it is something that we will continue to have to deal with. So we, you know, I believe we are fundamentally short-staffed. The headcount that we are having difficulty filling. The turnover in the headcount is significant. And I don't see that ending anytime soon.
I'm right
Thank
here.
you. You know,
Sandy.
Sandy, yeah, I want to say thank you for the honesty in that, right? And so it actually brings me back to, if we know that's what, like, a major challenge, right? Then we have to build something into our system to be able to accommodate or adjust for that, right? So that's why I'm going back to what I was saying before, that, you know, if you know, there are going to be these challenges around sort of the human part of this, then we have to make sure that our systems are smart enough to be able to compensate, adjust, and assist a workforce that's always going to be relatively new, at least for the foreseeable.
Yeah,
I
so
mean, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just going to say one of the things that we recommended to mitigate some of that risk is to ensure that their processes are clearly documented, to just sort of ease the knowledge transfer. So if it's inevitable that employees are going to leave or that new hires are going to come, at least the process of breaking them in and transferring that knowledge will be a little bit more seamless.
Is there an industry standard for turnover in a call center that we could reference as well to kind of benchmark whether the turnover that we're seeing in the BERS call center is standard for
Normal.
typical call centers?
There possibly would be, we didn't look into that. That was out of scope for this audit, but if is that something that you would like some feedback on?
Yeah, I mean, I think understanding there was a note in here about how part of the turnover was related to the fact that the call center was being staffed by temp workers due to a lack of benefits that they were leaving, which doesn't really align with our conversation here today. And you know, salary levels for call center workers, I would imagine, are set by the DCAS ranges that we referenced earlier. So it's not as if the city's not investing, or BERS is unable to pay call center reps an adequate salary. I think challenges in hiring are a different question entirely, but you still got 2 vacancies out there. I guess I'm confused as to, I want to have a little bit more information on retention and whether or not this is like a culture thing, because I know that we had conversations about that last quarter when we discussed the stigma of the call center that currently exists within the BERS organization, or if it's something else.
I believe
Or
it's
this is just normal for call centers.
well, in general, call centers will have a high turnover rate, right? But specifically to BERS, and I did say I would look into what the benchmark is on, established call centers. But for BERS, I think it's a mix of the culture / stigma issue that we previously discussed, and then the use of temps as well, because temps tend to move on quicker than provisional employees. So I think it's a mix of factors at play here.
So do we have temps in the call center or not?
We have temps in MCU. We do. I
Okay.
do not believe we have any temps on the call center that have access to CPMS. It is not to get access to CPMS.
Yeah, you already said it.
Through DIIT, you must be a full-time employee.
So
Sandy, you
then-
mean PMS?
Yes. And to follow up on your question, Russell, and Tom's comment, we retained Siegel Marco through an RFP about a year and a half, maybe it was 2 years ago now, to create SOPMs in coordination with all our departments. Call center has a full complement of SOPMs. We have a specific expertise contracted with Siegel Marco that could actually answer your question about relative turnover to the industry, relative responsiveness to the industry, the staffing requirements, all that stuff. Happy to add that to a briefing on the call center training. But you know, SOPMs have been a project for the last few years to get them completed through the entire organization, and I believe we're 95% there. You know, I saw an update just a few days ago from Siegel Marco, and I haven't read it yet, so I don't know the exact statistical analysis, but I get a monthly report on their status. You know, I could start sharing that with the board if that's of interest.
I can just confirm that we don't have any temps in the call center.
Right.
They're in the overall MCU organization, presumably doing emails, text messages.
Exactly, under the supervision of staff, yes.
Correct.
Okay.
I just have two comments. Call it what you will. What I'm going to say. I mean, I've been around and I've seen, right? A large turnover could mean two things. One, the way I look at it, right? Bad working conditions where employees are not happy, or bad management. Call it what you will. I'm just going to make that comment, right? We want to look at both things. The other thing I'm concerned about is one thing that was mentioned: as we're growing, or as the support system or the system's growing, BERS support is growing and maturing, right? So the whole thing is going back to the Cisco platform and the touch point, right? I mean, I've been around seeing a lot of systems. Systems nowadays in this day and age, if you're not open and flexible and integratable, you're pretty much going to be extinct. And if we're going to grow and mature, we want to grow and mature with a system that can move forward with that. So that may be something just good to just think about and get an idea of how open these systems are to be able to integrate. I've been in the company for 32 years where I know that we have some systems just unbridgeable. That's the reality. But then looking forward is, do you want to move forward with that or not? So that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. All right. Finding 4, hot topic.
Right.
Any other comments before we move on to number 5?
Yeah, before we move on, I just wanted to clarify, I'm looking at the full audit report, and in November of 2021, there were 8 full-time employees, including temps. Okay, so if we want to get more specific than that, I can do so when I review my work papers. But as of November, there were temps in the call center.
Yeah, I don't care that much. I'm just trying to understand where we are now and what we're doing going forward. I
Okay.
read that as well, Adaya. That's why I wanted to ask the clarifying question, and it sounds like there are none now and there won't be any going forward, although we might have done it in the past. Would you say that's accurate, Sandy?
You know what? I don't know how they counted for the call center reps. I don't believe we ever put a temporary employee on the phone with a member, ever. I would ask Sally to confirm that, but I don't believe that's true.
We should move on.
Yeah, I don't know that we can answer that regarding to history, but at any rate, the assessment has been made that PMS access is really required for somebody who is assisting members live with general queries. So
Yeah, and actually that's a good reference there, Alex. Could you clarify for me and others PMS versus CPMS?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Versus VITEC
yeah,
versus
so
velocity versus this, that, and the other thing?
of course. So CPMS, the Comprehensive Pension Management System, is the system that we use internally. This is developed by VITEC, extensively customized specifically for BERS. The first version of this went live in 2017 after a development process that was, well, many years long, depending on how you're counting, let's say about 9 years. Now, Velocity is the name of the project to currently, add many more features to CPMS. CPMS is still essentially the core program, right? Which contains all of the data, all of the BERS maintained data. And yes, the system is not perfect and the development process is cumbersome, but it represents just an enormous step forward compared to where we were before 2017. And it really was very successful in integrating many different data sources that never used to talk to each other. So that's CPMS. And anyone who works for BERS, including temps, gets access to CPMS. Unless maybe there might be some people, for example, who don't work with members at all, right? But otherwise, they have CPMS so that they can review the members' retirement-related records. Now, PMS is one of the several payroll systems maintained by the City of New York. It's the principal one. It's maintained by FISA OPA. And this is where you go to find out what an employee's status is, whether they might be enrolled in another retirement system, whether they're active or on a leave without pay. In addition to PMS, there are also two systems maintained by the Department of Education called EIS and APRL. All these systems have this thing in common, which is that access is controlled by, well, I think in one case, FISA, and in the other case, DOE, but in no cases would access be permitted to someone who doesn't have an employee ID number from the City of New York. So in order to access the live payroll records, you need to be an employee of the city. And accessing live payroll records is considered to be indispensable for the task of helping a member live with general purpose inquiries at the call center. This is the assessment that was made for that position. There are, of course, many other jobs at BERS that do not require this. I hope that was helpful. If you have follow-up questions, shoot.
Yeah, no, that was a fabulous overview of the various
Very
acronyms.
helpful. Thank you. Very helpful. Thank you.
All right, so
I think you're good, Ade. Yeah.
all right, so moving on to finding number 5. This is pertaining to the member self-service portal. MSS is a portal within CPMS that Alex just described, right? That allows members to submit transactions, communicate with us securely, and request loan. Well, the functionality for that is currently not available, but we do have that as a functionality that will become available again in the future. So our goal here was to see if BERS had identified any lessons learned and if there were any continuous improvement efforts around MSS, but due to the fact that the functionality had been limited, there was no formal evaluation of this portal, right? So we did recommend that when it becomes available that they do this review and document any lessons learned and see how MSS is supporting and helping the call center.
So MSS is the system within CPMS that is documenting all of the touch points.
No, it's the portal, it's the member self-service portal within CPMS where members can go to view their account information, submit transactions, and things like that.
Sorry, I'm misunderstanding. So this is a finding that's related, not necessarily related to the call center itself, but rather like an inflow to the call center as a result of this.
Yeah, so our thought is that MSS could be leveraged, right, to reduce the burden on the call center, to effectively communicate with the members and sort of reduce those phone calls and interactions with the members. So if MSS is answering their questions or able to provide that to the members, then perhaps there will be less calls coming in. So we compared so this is moving on to number 6 now. So we compared the certain policies and procedures that the call center had developed against the APQC. So the APQC is the American Productivity and Quality Center, right? They are a thought leader when it comes to benchmarking and best practices and process improvement. So we wanted to see where these policies and procedures were at compared to best practice. We did note some areas of improvement, and we provided that in an addendum to the report to the call center. And we've gotten some feedback on that from them. We've provided them with more information that they can use to sort of improve their documentation. And then for number 7, we looked at the authentication process when members and retirees call for password requests. So we noted that the authentication process is not, there's no requirement for the reps to document the authentication process when they're helping members with password resets. We also noted that the only way for call center management to verify if the security questions that they're supposed to ask were actually asked is by listening to the calls, since there's no required documentation, and listening to calls doesn't always happen often. And then in terms of requests that come in via email, although they don't send the password reset link if the email doesn't match the email on file, but there's no required verification of PII before that link is sent. So we did recommend that the authentication steps are documented, and we recommended that they incorporate that into their procedure document to make sure that every time they authenticate a member, that process is recorded and documented. And then also for email responsive which go out through MCU, we also recommended that MCU be required to authenticate before providing that password link. And then for finding number 8,
Before we move on to finding number 8 a day, I just want to take a breath. I want to kind of, so the target completion date for the last 2 findings is both May 2022. You know, they're all sort of SOPM updates. Have you confirmed that a lot of these updates have already been made?
So a lot of them are in progress based on what they told me in May. Sorry, I'm looking at my remediation log now. Policy and procedure.
And I guess, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so for finding number 7, they did ask me to push back to June rollout for this update, so that they could have enough time to include it in their team manual.
Okay.
So the reason why you don't necessarily have updates recorded in this presentation are, this is the first time that the audit is being reported to the audit committee, right? So I'm giving you what we found at the time, and then subsequently you will get updates.
Right, and the report's dated April, I get that.
Right. So they are being proactive in terms of implementing some of these things, like they've started working on their meetings and the manuals and everything, but they weren't really required to update me until around August.
Got it. And then I guess I have one more question that's sort of tying 5 and 7 together, which I think is for you, Sandy. When is a realistic timeline for having the forgot password feature re-implemented on the BERS website for access to member self-service?
Probably not until March of 2023.
Could you expand on that a little bit?
So for the last 12 months, we have been trying to hire a cybersecurity expert. We went through multiple postings. We made a job offer to an internal candidate who turned it down. We made a job offer to an external candidate who showed up for 4 hours and then ghosted us. That was just 2 weeks ago. We are working on an RFP to pursue a third-party consulting contract. We are giving up on the hiring effort because it has failed now twice. And it is all a matter of getting that expertise internally so that we can resolve the question of identity confirmation. It is the gateway to all of these issues, the opening up of MSS, the confirmation of a person's identity. And to be honest, we thought we had an answer. It was proposed by Vitek. It was proposed about 6 months ago, but there has been an internal lack of conclusion on the use of ID.me. And until we conclude on how we will guard that gate, we cannot open it.
How do other pension systems work their?
Well, I can tell you that what NYCBERS does is have an internal staff that replicates ID.me. So ID.me uses visual confirmation, looking at your face live visually, and compares it to government issued IDs that are provided via email or mail to ID.me. NYCBERS actually has a department that does that. They get copies of passports, copies of DMV issued IDs or other qualified IDs, and visually confirm an individual is the individual. And the reason that is so crucial is that you have to assume all PII is available on everyone everywhere. And therefore, PII is no longer a viable verification vector. It is compromised. It has to be assumed to be compromised for everyone. That's
strange world we live in these days.
It's not that strange, Russell. So, look,
Speak for yourself.
So 8 years ago, I was working in the Obama administration. My identity was stolen 3 times. It was stolen from the Agriculture Department that did the payroll for my agency. It was stolen from OPM, which manages all the personnel files for all the agencies. And they stole my FBI file because I had a top secret clearance. My entire FBI file was stolen from the FBI. So don't believe anyone can protect anything. It's not possible. It's
with a name like Sandy Rich, you're a high profile target.
No, I'm not. I don't have that much money. But I can also tell you, I have to file my taxes with a specific office with the IRS who actually sends me a notice every year on where that is. It's really a freaking complication.
Sounds like
it's a
fun.
Nightmare. Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be your tax accountant.
Yeah. Well, my tax accountant's my wife. Causes disruption every year.
Speaking of wives, my own wife had to utilize ID.me recently for something. I don't remember exactly what, and she was aghast at how complicated it was and aghast at how they were asking her to confirm at prior addresses that she didn't live it anymore, and so some things were working, other things weren't working, and eventually she got in, but it was I've never personally encountered it. I know there's like rumors that it's going to be used for tax filing, I believe, at this point, right?
It's possible. It's possible the IRS will use it. Social Security already uses it. I've experienced it when I opened up a Social Security account last year, 2 years ago. I had to do an ID.me visual identity confirmation, and it was a pain in the neck. But I call me brutalized and used to it.
So the RFP that you've given up on hiring a security expert. You're going to move to an RFP for a consulting contract, and the idea behind this consulting contract is that it's addressing your cybersecurity needs in some way to ultimately reset the password, but how?
Well, so it'll actually give us a structure to make the resolution of what is best approach to this. And what we're doing is we're copying an RFP used by police pension They recently hired a firm from New Jersey to do this for them. And we hope to get that RFP out in the next month or two. And, there are a number of firms that do this. They provide expertise and they provide a reliable source of expertise, which they refresh. They do all the training. They provide that expertise. We will commit internal resources to work with them and develop that understanding and intelligence internally, but we'll probably forever be reliant on external expertise.
So it's kind of like and I'm just trying to, I know we talked about this a few months ago, and I'm just trying to refresh my memory of all of the various intricacies again, because obviously it has a huge impact on the call center, huge impact on the member experience. It's kind of like an RFB within an RFP to a certain RFB within an RFB, right? Because we're procuring a consultant to advise us on then how to turn around and address whether we're procuring an ID.me or ID.me or some other corollary ID.me or something else like NYCBERS does, all of which is in service of trying to understand how we can best protect our members' data.
Yeah, it's broader than that, Russell. So an external, and I would recommend if people want to understand this, there's a very good contractor called NOPSEC, NOPSEC, that I've used before, that actually does this. They actually have a nice educational program describing their services, but it is more than just resolving that particular issue. It is how do you manage access to the network? How do you protect against ransomware attacks? The revision of our COOP plan, the maintenance of our COOP plan, the examination of weaknesses in our network and testing it routinely, and even the training of individuals internally to prevent ransomware attacks and email attacks. And so it would be a very broad responsibility for an external contractor. And it won't be just the question of how do you verify someone's identity. It will be a more universal review of all our systems. And it'll also include something which I believe we need to do, which is a information systems survey and management program to strategically review all our systems, all our licenses, all our security, and manage that going forward, including the velocity, which will continue to evolve over time, and Cisco and Citrix and our investment software and our HR software. We have software all over the agency.
Oh yeah, we live in a digital world, right?
It is everywhere. It's yeah.
So
and we need to get a better handle on it.
So that's a huge scope, obviously, for this consulting contract. Is one of the immediate goals of that contract to identify whether it's ID.me or another vendor to then ultimately address the PII question, and then theoretically the result of that would be either I guess I'm just trying, when we talked about this issue before, you said like, okay, ID.me is, probably the solution we need to go with. And then we're like, well, maybe we need to do an RFP, maybe we don't. I guess I just, you say March 2023, which seems like far away, but it's only 9 months away. And I know that if you're doing an RFP for a consulting contract, then advise on a subsequent RFP for a security system, I would probably double that timeline.
Well, thanks for your optimistic review.
Thanks for my realistic review.
Yes, I know. Actually, I would like to run roughshod over the RFP. I just
Watch your
saw
words.
Sharon clinch. Run roughshod on the RFP process to get security protections to activate MSS as quickly as possible. I'm hoping that having an external consultant who actually tells us and tells trustees that this is a world-class answer, this is a viable response, and you can use it for the next 12 months while you activate an RFP to determine whether you want to replace them. I'm still a believer that is a possibility. I will be,
So basically like an interim negotiated services for
I-
for a period while an RFP is outstanding.
yeah, this is a balance of how do you make members less unhappy by activating the member self-service portal and giving them access to it. And on the other weighing side is the procurement problems and risks of going directly to a service contract, negotiated service contract. At the moment, you know, we don't have an internal capability to offset the procurement weight. So we, that's a practical reality at the moment. I'm thinking when we get an external consultant who can give us an explicit opinion that is stronger than our concern about procurement, we may be able to implement fast. I may be optimistic, so maybe it's September 2023, but that would be, to me, that's a tremendous failure on our part. I mean, I just view that as just unbelievably bad.
It's unfortunate. It's really
I-
unfortunate. Yeah, I mean,
It's just-
I thank you for digging into the details of what the process looks like. I just know that that's a really front and center member facing issue that I get asked about. And I'll have to look into this NOPSEC thing because I don't understand this area nearly as much as I ought to. Alan, maybe with your background, you might understand it a little bit better, information security. I'm sorry to hear that you had an external candidate ghost you after 4 hours. That seems like a story that I want to hear later.
Yeah.
But I'll close off now. I know we have a couple more things to run through. We only have 10 minutes left.
All right, so the last finding pertains to documentation. This is a low grade finding, but we noted that the call center wasn't documenting requests for vacation based on their policy and procedure documents, and they were unable to provide support for the 17 leave requests that were in the period that we reviewed. So our recommendation was to reiterate the requirement that vacation and time off be requested via email, and that they retain both the requests and the approvals to help them in planning and ensuring that they have full coverage, or at least to minimize disruptions within the call center. So that's the last of the call center findings. And
Thank
then,
you. Alan, I see you get your hand up.
Yes, just a quick request. I'm assuming this, well, this is a work in progress, of course, right? And I'm assuming this document is hopefully can be dynamic. Can you add a status? I can't even speak. Can you add a status column to it so this way we could keep track and see if the metrics in regards to target dates are missed and push out how far? Just an idea. I mean,
okay, so in terms of an update for this one, they did have that discussion with their staff in subsequent meetings, and they plan to incorporate that into the policy and procedure document. And then as far as updates go, I do have a separate presentation, which we don't have time to get into, that will give you status updates on all of the findings. So this audit is being reported to the committee for the first time, so hence is in this presentation as opposed to the other one with the status updates.
Yeah, this was Alan. I'd actually requested this at some point in the last year or two. I think, given our timing, and also, Ade, you mentioned at the very beginning that the follow-up report document was getting pretty large. If the other board members of the audit committee are open to it, I would propose another audit committee meeting at some point in the next month or so, perhaps, to just focus purely on the follow-up report document. And maybe we can kind of figure out a better way to organize and prioritize and make it a useful document for the committee members and also for you, Ade, because I don't want you to have to be like running around tracking things down. Ideally, it's a tracking document that's useful and helpful. And it's getting pretty unwieldy. So I recognize that I had requested that, and I recognize that my request is maybe spiraling a little out of control. So I want to be mindful of that. And also, be realistic, right? I think being realistic is important when I make requests of BERS. So, is everyone potentially open to something maybe early July after the 4th?
Yeah, I
Well,
have no problem.
yeah, is it possible to see the document or a truncated version with just the high ratings or something like that? Is that possible?
Yes, that
Okay.
is possible as well.
Because to me, that's what would be critical, at least the
Right.
status of what's high, at least to prioritize that.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's John. I'm okay with that as well.
Okay, so we will set up something for early July, after the 5th. And Russell, I'm imagining that you want that to be a detail, because I have a big spreadsheet that contains way more details than we could fit into
I
onto a present.
imagine. I can only imagine. Maybe if the other board members don't care as much, maybe you and I can just work on it. And
Okay.
yeah, I appreciate the effort that you put into it, and also recognize that it is getting very large.
Right. All right, so I'll set something up and I'll have everything ready to go over.
All right, great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So in terms of ongoing, really quickly, so we are currently in field work for the procurement audit. We're doing a check management audit. It also includes EFT payments that are going out, and we're using the Controller's Directive 11 as a tool for this audit. We're doing an audit also of the variable program takedown. This was specifically requested by Sandy. And we are going to kick that off, I believe, next week. Next week is the kickoff date for that one. We also have the logical and physical access security audit that we're going to kick off later this week, I believe. And then the ongoing, well, the audit of BAM, like I said, we haven't heard from the auditors in a long time, so I'm not sure what the status of that audit is. If there are no questions on these, that's everything I have for today.
Today, it's Sandy.
Yes.
Could you make sure I'm including the takedown audit launch, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think I'm good a day. I had one question for you, just from a procedural standpoint, on the first one. I believe it's an annual audit. This one being for fiscal 2021, right?
You mean the
The payroll,
Mhm.
yeah, the payroll procedures audit.
Yes.
So I don't remember when the fiscal 2021 was dated, but this one's dated March. You think you're going to be all good timing wise to get to continually do this audit? I mean, I know that we have to do it every year because of the comptroller, but
Yeah.
I guess I just wanted to make sure that your schedule was going to allow you to continue to keep up with the annual requirements first and foremost.
So I did shift the schedule instead of having one, because we had two audits going on at the same time. It was a little bit stressful for HR. So I moved the payroll procedures audit that was supposed to happen this fall to Q1 of next year. And it's going to cover 2 years instead of 1 year. So,
I like that. That's a great plan. I'm really into that. That
okay.
will the comptroller will be fine with that.
Well, I don't know that they're actively, I haven't heard from them regarding any of this, so I don't know that they're actively looking at that. Yeah, but I just thought it was best to do it that way.
Rather ask for forgiveness than permission.
We're still going to cover the 2 years.
Is this meeting still being recorded?
Yes, it is.
Understood.
Yeah, so there will be coverage, but just the timing will be a little bit pushed back.
Got it. I appreciate it.
Now,
Quick
I'll
question.
add, Russell, you should be proud of that statement.
Quick question.
Yes.
Will you still have a quorum if I drop off? I have to take care of something with my daughter.
I think so.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
We're going to be dropping in 2 minutes anyway,
Oh, okay. Then I'll stick around.
because I have a 4 o'clock, unfortunately. I know there's a spirited discussion here today, which I definitely appreciate. That is what this forum is for. So that's ongoing audits, internal and external. Let me flip back over here.
Yeah, so that ends my presentation and takes us to item number 5.
Awesome.
agenda.
Thank you so much, Aday, for an excellent presentation. The next item on our agenda is agenda item number 5, which is committee discussion. May I please have a motion? May I please have a motion to consider?
So moved.
Thank you, Tony. May I have a second?
Second from John.
Thank you, John. All right. Are there any issues regarding what was discussed here today, other than the healthy discussion that we have already had, that need to be discussed any further? And does anyone have any additional questions? So Aday, you and I will connect on the follow-up report.
Okay, I just wanted to mention, I know we're out of time, but so for the extension of the Baker Tilly contract, it will be coming up in one of the future board meetings, just so you're aware. I was hoping we could talk in more detail, but at a minimum, just be aware that we will be asking to extend the contract again, and
Does it expire June 30?
Well, the audits that we contracted expire at the end of at the end of June, but the time of the contract expires in December to allow us to complete those audits. So I'm going to be asking to add more audits for the end to, cover the end of the year and the next fiscal year.
Okay. Yeah, I
And
think
this is pretty important stuff, because Aday needs internal staff, but we just don't have the headcount approved yet. So Baker Tilly is her staff, and she has done remarkable work with this. And so continuation of Baker Tilly's contract is going to be crucial.
Yeah, I agree, Sandy. I think the robustness of this discussion today would indicate its critical nature, as I have, was trying to sell the board at our last board meeting on getting a 5th alternate from the full board. It really is an excellent opportunity to gain better insight and understanding of the Board of Education retirement system operations, and really understand what's going on with the day-to-day, which is maybe more appropriate for the audit committee than the full board.
Yep.
So yeah, I think, Aday, to the extent that you have any materials or documentation about the contract, and if you're asking for additional financial capacity under that budget, happy to take a look at it. I think I had asked Sandy a similar question of you and the team on the overall fiscal 23 budget last week.
Yep.
I'll do that.
Thanks so much. That does indeed, 1 minute late, conclude the agenda for this meeting. The next meeting of the Audit Committee of the BERS Board of Trustees will be scheduled for the 3rd quarter of 2022 and communicated to all committee members and invitees. May I please have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Tom Shepard.
Thank you,
Second,
Tom.
Tony Lopez.
Thank you, Tony.
Third.
No
All
one's
those
voting
in
against, I
favor,
suspect.
please say aye.
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 But remember, this is a fun group, Fun group. Get a
With
lot done. All right.
unanimous approval, the motion is approved. Thank you all. We are adjourned. I greatly appreciate your engagement on these topics and look forward to our next conversation.